just the awareness that these transcendent moments or these spiritual experiences, that they're important. They're important to being human. They're important to our creative life. I would say they're important to our intellectual life as well. The realization that we need to make time for them. We need to make space in our life for these experiences. I would, offer that suggestion to both religious people and non-religious people. Religious people already have a strong foundation for their spirituality, that is their belief in God. But I think you could believe in God and still not be open to these experiences. I mean, part of it is an understanding that the world is moving too fast these days, and that we really need to make time, make space for these experiences.
I'm Brandon Vaidyanathan, and this is Beauty at Work, the podcast that seeks to expand our understanding of beauty, what it is, how it works, and why it matters for the work we do. This season of the podcast is sponsored by John Templeton Foundation and Templeton Religion Trust. Hey everyone, this is the second half of my conversation with MIT physicist and writer Alan Lightman. Please check out the first half if you haven't already. In the first part of our conversation, we talked about Alan's views on the role of beauty in science and why he calls himself a spiritual materialist. In this episode, we'll hear more about the questions that science cannot answer and why spirituality should matter to us, whether we're religious or not. Let's get started.
Well, you mentioned the word gratitude, and I know that that's very important in Buddhism, and it may be important in Hinduism as well. I'm more familiar with Buddhism. But I think that we don't show enough gratitude. And somehow, I think Darshan is connected to gratitude. That we're thankful for being alive at all. I mean, we're very privileged to be alive at all in the universe. The fraction of matter in the universe that's in living form is 1/billionth of 1/billionth. That's like a few grains of sand on the Gobi Desert.
Right.
So we have a particular arrangement of atoms in our bodies that make us alive, and we're very privileged for that position. And conscious and intelligent life is even more rare. We living beings, and especially we intelligent living beings, are the only way that the universe can comment on itself. We are the observers, the spectators. And so there's both an obligation there and a sense of gratitude. And somehow I think that sense of gratitude is connected to being open to the world around us and being open to other people. I don't think we show enough gratitude to other people.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. It's just another practice. I think it's traditionally a spiritual practice to cultivate, right? Is gratitude. I want to share, a story. I mean, I sent you this little quote from another biologist we interviewed, and her story reminded me a bit of your experience on the boat. She says, this is a UK biologist who we talked to. So I was on a boat and there was bioluminescence across the whole ocean. And then when you were swimming in the water, your whole body glowed, and the fish around you would also glow the moment they moved. And then there were dolphins at one point, and they crossed, and you could just see everything through light, and that sense of understanding that all of these little glowing lights are individual organisms that are glowing for their own reasons. And actually that connects us, all of us. And that was a profound experience of real emotional connection. It was very touching. But then there's that sense of I'm just this swirling part of this glowing tapestry. And that's where I would say I felt spiritual. I wouldn't say it felt that way because I felt a stronger sense of connection to a higher power or God or gods. I think for me, I suppose it felt spiritual just in that sense of being connected and being part of that whole tapestry of being, and being small in that moment and an insignificant part of that tapestry of being, right? So these experiences of awe, of the sublime, of vastness, of being pulled out of yourself, but also of being connected, of being united. And the philosopher Charles Taylor argues that this is a universal human need. He says that this kind of cosmic connection is not simply any mode of awareness of the surrounding world, but one shot through with joy and significance and inspiration. And this is a human constant felt, at least by some people in all ages across human history. I'd like to believe it's a human constant and then that's human universal. But we talked to a number of scientists who said, look, I don't even know what you mean by connection. I don't think I've experienced anything like it. And I'm curious to know what you think of that. Are some people incapable of it, or just don't know how to attend to it, or does it need practice? Or why would some people say, like, none of this makes sense to me? We would share some vignettes and examples with them. We shared your example of being on the boat, and they're like, I've never experienced anything like that. I don't even know what it would feel like to have that experience. So I'm just curious to know what you think.
Well, I think that all of us have experiences of connection, but we may not name it that. I think there are other transcendent experiences that are common, like being present at the birth of a baby, especially if it's your baby. That is a profound feeling, and you can call it connection, or you might call it something else, but it's certainly a very profound emotional feeling of being part of something larger than yourself. I think that people, that all of us have gone out on a clear night and looked up at the sky, at the stars. And I would guess that most people feel something when they do that, whether they describe it as a connection or not. I think they're feeling something large there. These people that you talked to that said they didn't experience anything like what I felt being on the boat, or like the biologist felt with the bioluminescence. I think that if you had a longer conversation with them and probed more deeply, you might find that they did have experiences that were not unlike those, and they may not have labeled them that, but
yeah, I suppose, yeah, it's part of the limits of a 1 hour or hour and a half long interview. There's only so much, and without the some people are much more comfortable being open with a strange sociologist intervening in their lives, and others are not, or have the language.
What about falling in love? I mean, almost all of us have fallen in love, and we know that feeling of becoming part of someone else, where for a while your ego dissolves and you just feel like that other person is your world, or a part of your world. That also is not unrelated to what we're talking about. So I do think that if you would talk longer with these people and your guests and brought up other kinds of situations, like falling in love or watching the birth of a baby or something, or going outside and look up at the sky, that you might have found a resonance somewhere.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Yeah, it's hard to know what that would be. And even with falling in love, I know some people like to reduce it just to, well, that's just a chemical, feelings, and you trivialize it, right? But there's got to be something that people find significant.
I'd like to talk to one of those people who says there's just a chemical.
Yeah, we were surprised at some of the people we talked to, and I don't know if they were just being ornery or defensive, or So the other piece of pushback we got was like, why spirituality, right? And which perhaps I could ask you, because there are both scientists and even some social scientists we talked to who think we're trying to be too expansive in extending the scope of spirituality to this sort of secular spirituality, right? So it's got, part of the problem is, it's got some baggage. If you say spirituality, people think it's all woo-woo, mysticism.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
It's the word spirituality has a bad rep. But in terms of why spirituality, I mean, look at a lot of our art that is inspired by something. It might not be by a divine being, but it's certainly inspired. Look at the Cro-Magnon paintings in the caves of France that are 30,000 years old, that have a very strong aesthetic to them. Look at some of the buildings that we build, our cathedrals. I think that whatever you call it, that there's something there that is operating at an emotional level that is part of being human. It's part of our achievements. It's part of us. We're not just all rational beings. We're emotional beings as well. I think it would be hard for you to find a guest to interview on your program who didn't have an emotional life of some kind or other.
Yeah. So I suppose that, so some of the social scientists we would talk to would say, why not just call it emotions, or call it awe, or call it, human desires for things of higher value? Why use the word spirit? spiritual or spirituality,
Yeah.
which is associated with a ontological,
Yeah, it doesn't matter what you call
non-materialism.
it. I've used the word spirituality myself, and you have, and many other people have, but it's not the word itself. I do understand that some people have a negative reaction to that word because they associate it with organized religion and with required belief in God and all of that. So I think that that's why we have to define what we mean by that word. In other words, I mean, I've given a lot of lectures, public lectures. During the Q&A, people ask me, do you believe in God? And the first thing I say is, tell me what you mean by God.
Right.
We use these words, but some of them, are very complicated and have many layers of meaning, and you really have to define what you're talking about.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you whether spirituality, in the sense in which you mean it, is always positive. I was reading a largely positive valence, but can it ever be negative? Because certainly in the context of religion, there's spiritual abuse or spirituality for the sake of dominating others, spiritual cults, right? And can this kind of spiritual materialism have a dark side in any way?
Well, I suppose it could. I mean, all of the experiences that I personally have had that I associate with spirituality are positive. But I suppose that if a person had a concept of spirituality that included indoctrination or something equivalent to the Crusades,
Right.
Sure. We certainly have, forced religion. I don't know exactly how you would say that. And I do respect religious beliefs of all kinds, but religion has done a lot of good things and also a lot of bad things in the history of humans, and so has science. So it depends. Yeah. It depends how you use it.
Yeah. And because I suppose there are spiritual cults that are, maybe not theistic, but they certainly have, once you have a charismatic leader and once you have people who follow that leader and, a structure around it, or even beliefs that could be misleading, perhaps, right? That maybe.
Yeah. I mean, I think that cults in general, they probably have more potential for darkness than light. I'm wary of cults of all kinds,
right?
Which I define as just sort of a blind commitment to a person or an idea.
Yeah. I really enjoyed your PBS documentary, and there was a section there where you go into the fMRI machine with your colleague there in his lab, and once you look at the neural correlates of your experience on the boat, perhaps you're not satisfied. There's something that's dissatisfying around it, and then you ask your rabbi, what are questions that science cannot answer for you? And I'd like to ask you that question: why you were dissatisfied with the explanation that neuroscience can offer, and then are there questions that science can't answer for you?
Well, I was dissatisfied with the explanation of the neuroscientist. His name is Robert Desimone. Of course, he was speaking for neuroscience in general. I was dissatisfied because I didn't think that all of the factual information about how much electrical current was flowing through different parts of my brain, I didn't think that captured the feeling that I had. And that gets, to the question of consciousness, because consciousness is the fundamental mental sensation. And we still don't understand exactly how consciousness arises from the material brain. And being a materialist, I don't think there's any supernatural element of consciousness. I think that it somehow arises from the chemical and electrical behavior of neurons in the brain. But how we get from that material basis to the sensation of consciousness, the feeling that we're separate entities in the world, that we have a self-awareness, and that we can plan for the future and all the other attributes of consciousness. I don't think that we don't yet know how to get from the material neurons to that experience that we call consciousness. So I don't know whether science will be able to explain the feelings that we have or the experience of consciousness, even though I think almost all scientists agree that the mind and the brain are the same thing. that everything that we think and feel and experience is rooted in the material neurons of the brain. But it may be that the tools of science are not appropriate for capturing or describing that sensation.
Yeah, yeah. I suppose they're also inappropriate for questions of meaning, right? And a lot of the kinds of things that you describe as spiritual, even your relationship with your spouse. I mean, it would be kind of absurd to describe that in scientific terms.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are plenty of interesting questions that lie outside the domain of science. As you say, meaning there are ethical questions like is it ethical to kill an enemy soldier in time of war? Is it ethical to kill someone who is entering your house with a gun is threatening your family? There are lots of ethical questions of that nature. Also, I'm not sure that science is the appropriate tool for questions of aesthetics. Why is this Rembrandt painting so beautiful? Or why does this symphony haunt me? So again, I think that the aesthetic experience that we have is rooted in the brain, but I don't think that science is the right tool for trying to understand it or describe it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the other ways in which it seems that science is maybe inappropriately used is in trying to render accounts of the non-existence of God, right? Or to dismiss the God question. And some might argue that if a certain kind of God exists that is a presence, that has a personality, then the appropriate mode of encounter or of knowledge would be to attempt an encounter, right? To attempt something like a conversation. I'm curious to know what you think of that.
Well, I think what you said is absolutely right, that science cannot disprove the existence of God. And of course, there's some prominent scientists who have attempted to do that. But on the other hand, I believe that religion or theology cannot prove the existence of God, that we have to take the existence of God as a matter of faith.
Yeah. I'm curious to know what you think about experience, and particularly, the idea that if there is some kind of entity that one could have a relation with, then the right way of engaging or gaining knowledge about that entity is to attempt, some kind of conversation. And I wonder if that's something you've ever tried, or I don't know if you've ever tried, in childhood or.
Well, there are many people who believe they have had those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, I have myself, I think, and that's because I came back to some kind of faith in God in my teenage years, and it was partly through a surprising response to an experiment of this sort, which I didn't expect.
I respect that. But of course, having a conversation with a being that you believe exists, I think is perfectly fine. I mean, it makes sense. It's reasonable. But I do know that it is not only the prophets that have had these conversations with God, that there are many people living today, maybe including yourself, who have had such conversations and feel that there was some being on the other end that was holding up their end of the conversation.
Right. Yeah. And I suppose it's always a challenge to know, like, is this, are you fooling yourself? Or how do you know this is a legitimate interpretation of what's going on? Right. And I wanted to ask you to share your encounter with the ospreys, because I have a question around interpretation that comes out of that. Would you mind sharing that encounter?
Yes. Well, this also takes place in Maine. For many years, there has been an osprey nest a couple of 100 feet from our house on the island. And my wife and I watch the life cycles of the ospreys, from the laying the eggs to the hatching to the growing up of the babies. And one summer, I'd been very carefully watching the two baby ospreys as they were growing up over the summer. I was watching from a second-story circular deck on my house, and I was about eye level with the nest. The adolescent ospreys were looking at me as I was looking at them all summer long before they took their first flight. And an osprey has to be a couple of months old before it's strong enough to take its first flight. And I imagined that to those ospreys, it looked like I was standing in my nest because it was a circular deck, so that we had been looking at each other all summer long. And then finally, the moment came in early to mid-August when these two baby ospreys took their first maiden flight. So this is the first time that they had left the nest since they were born. And they did this very large loop out over the ocean and then turned around and swooped around and came right at me. And I was standing on this deck looking at them, and they were coming at me out. Now, an adolescent osprey is a fearsome beast. They're large birds, and they have very powerful claws, and these birds could have ripped my face off if they'd wanted to. So my first instinct was to run back into the house and protect myself. Instead, I just stood there, and the birds came at me at great speed, and when they were about 20 feet away, very close, they suddenly did a high G acceleration upward and went up and over the roof of the house. But for about 1 second before they did that high acceleration maneuver, we looked each other in the eye. They looked at me in the eye, and I looked at them in the eye. And there was a mountain of information that was exchanged between us, a mountain of feeling. In that second, I felt like they were talking to me, and they were saying something like, "We're brothers. We've shared this land together. We've had the same experience. We know each other." And it was a friendly look. And after they flew over the house, I realized that I was in tears and I was shaking because it was such a profound experience. I've had dogs and cats as pets, and I've never had that kind of communion with an animal, let alone a wild animal.
Yeah, that's extraordinary. And I'm convinced that's the right way to interpret it. But if someone were to come along and say, maybe those birds just had poor eyesight and they realized you're not just a bald squirrel, and they're like, "Oh, we can't eat him," right? And like, why would that not be a satisfying explanation of what happened there?
Well, because I didn't feel that.
Hmm.
I mean, of course, I don't know what was in the osprey's brains, and actually, birds have much more advanced brains than we think. We call people bird brains to diminish them, but actually the neurons in the brains of birds are packed very closely together, and so they have a lot of neurons there. So I don't know what was in the birds' brains, but I know what I felt. And no matter what anyone says to me or whatever alternative explanations they offer, they cannot deny the feeling that I had. I had the feeling, and it was the feeling, and it was an authentic feeling.
Yeah. Oh, but it seems it's more than just a feeling, because there's also an interpretation there, and it seems like there's an adequacy to that interpretation. There's some kind of correspondence between what happened and what you felt, as well as a narrative, an account that actually can render that meaningful and true. No, it seems like there's some kind of a truth claim underlying that.
Well, that's an interesting way that you speak of it. I wouldn't make a truth claim. What I would say is that I definitely felt a connection to these birds. I felt that they were talking to me, and I felt that I was connected not only to them, but to nature, that we were together part of nature. I don't know whether one could extend that to a truth claim, but it is a feeling that I have that was hyper emphasized by that encounter with the ospreys, a feeling that we're all connected, and we are connected not only to other human beings, but connected to nature.
Yeah. I think that's a crucial thing for us to recover in an alienated, disenchanted world that we're living in, right? Is how to build that. Could you talk a little bit about creative transcendent, the concept of the creative transcendent, and how that experience plays itself out in your science as well as in your writing?
Well, what I mean by the creative transcendent is that when we are creating something, and it could be writing a poem, it could be, making up a recipe for a new meal that you're cooking in the kitchen, a wide variety of things. We do get into a certain mental state where we lose track of our ego. We lose track of our self, and we rise above ourself in some way. And that's what I mean by the creative transcendent, and very briefly.
Yeah. I think, made a really compelling argument for why we should take spirituality seriously. Do you think that the kind of spiritual materialism that you're offering can be helpful in any way to religious believers to perhaps enrich their spiritual quests or journeys? Is there something that it could help enhance in their own practices or pursuits?
Well, I don't know. I think just the awareness of these transcendent moments or these spiritual experiences, that they're important. They're important to being human. They're important to our creative life. I would say they're important to our intellectual life as well.
Mm-hmm.
The realization that we need to make time for them. We need to make space in our life for these experiences. I would, offer that suggestion to both religious people and non-religious people. Religious people already have a strong foundation for their spirituality. That is their belief in God. But I think you could believe in God and still not be open to these experiences. I mean, part of it is an understanding that the world is moving too fast these days, and that we really need to make time, make space for these experiences. We have to honor them and recognize their importance.
Yeah, no, that's great. Alan, this season of our podcast is on yearning or longing. And so as we close, I just wanted to ask if there's something that you would say has been a profound longing or yearning that has driven your work and continues to drive the work you're doing these days.
Well, that's an easy one for me to answer. And that is the desire to, in my small way, to make the world a better place. I've led a very privileged, advantaged life. I grew up in an upper middle class family. We had enough money. I had opportunities. And I look around the world, and I've traveled a lot, especially to Southeast Asia, and I see many people who have not had those advantages. And I think that all of us who have some kind of privilege have some responsibility to help those who did not have those privileges and those advantages. And that's, for me, that's part of doing my bit to make the world a better place.
Yeah. Yeah, and you've done a tremendous amount. We'll direct our listeners and viewers to your books as well as your PBS series. And is there anything on the humanitarian work you're doing in Cambodia that you'd like to share and we could direct our audience to? Or?
Well, we have a website, which is www.harpswell.org. That's HARPSWELL. And our organization works to help empower young women in Southeast Asia. So we have a center in Cambodia and one in Malaysia, where we have participants, young women from all the countries of Southeast Asia. And that's been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life.
Amazing. Yeah. No, it's been great to learn about your work. Alan, that's it for my questions. Is there anything else you'd like to add on the themes that we're discussing that we haven't touched on?
Well, you've had a great conversation with me, Brandon, and part of that is due to your own smarts and also a lot of preparation you did for this, which I thank you for.
Well, your work is such a delight. It's been so refreshing for me.
Okay, well, let me know when this is broadcast, when it's live.
Absolutely, will do. Thanks again, Alan. It's been such a pleasure.
Okay, thanks, Brandon.
All right, folks, that's a wrap for this episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with someone who would find it of interest. Also, please subscribe and leave us a review if you haven't already. Thanks, and see you next time.